Hello, thank you. Lovely introduction. So I wanted to use this presentation a bit to explain about tools for action, how it evolved, and how we came to Signals and Signals 2.0. What I'm very excited about, a new performance together with Susan Sandler, who is sitting right there, and her dance and art students from LaSalle College of Art. So, how did it begin? At art school, I always had the feeling I want to somehow contribute to society, but also be an artist, and so make things, but that maybe also have a positive impact on society. I was involved in climate activism, and then in 2010, while still at art school, we decided to, with a group of friends, to come together, and we made this 12-meter inflatable hammer. We folded it into a suitcase, and then gave it to a friend who was traveling to the UN climate change conference in Mexico at the time, where it was picked up by an activist group who was running with it during the day of protest. It got destroyed by the police. One journalist from Reuters Global Media Corporation was filming it, and on that day, the inflatable hammer became the icon of the protest of that day globally. So it was in German television, UK television, US, China. So there we understood how inflatables can really, can have an impact, and you can somehow parasite or subvert media spectacles with kind of low-budget means. The symbol of the hammer was inspired by a quote we found at the time. It said, "Art is not a mirror to society, but a hammer with which to shape it." And basically we did not know what would happen, but through this experience and this activity, we could say that the artist group Tools for Action was founded. And the quote was also inspiring for further series of actions. Basically, we believe that you need to intervene in society to create an impact, and that's why the idea of the hammer, the tool, and not just depict society. This was basically a motto for us, but we don't want to be dogmatic as well. We always change it. Experimentation is very important. So, 6 years later, we did the project Mirror Barricade. This was a collaboration with the theater of Dortmund, a city in Germany. Dortmund has a violent neo-Nazi scene. They're just basically 80 neo-Nazis. They live, some of them have a house, they live in the street, and this is kind of the no-go area. So you can walk through, but basically they see this as their area, and they organized a march in their city and invited all neo-Nazi groups from Europe together. And there have been also killings in the city through the years on. So there have been also protests against it, but the city was really stagnant as what to do about it, and not knowing what to do about it. So we came here with this new idea that was the Mirror Barricade. This project you can also see in the exhibition. The idea was that we create these inflatable cubes with a mirrored side on it to reflect back the violence, the hatred of this violent group, but at the same time to reflect our own position. The Mirror Barricade functions as a symbol. However, it also functions as a functional barricade, as you can assemble it or put them together and create a blockade of the street. So what we did was we gave school workshops, 14 schools. In one day, the students learned how to make their own barricade, and then we did also trainings basically in choreography, how to put them together, how to coordinate as a group, which was a lot of fun. And we also gave public workshops, like here. You see here an evangelical minister working together with a punk. And yeah, this project really was very popular. In 5 to 6 weeks, we built 110 cubes. One cube to build takes around 3 to 5 hours to build for a group of 2 to 5 people. And we kind of showed how to do it, and it was a kind of alternative way of mobilization. There were public trainings. This was the biggest public training with all the cubes together. And then on the day of action, groups could just borrow a barricade kit, 6 cubes, a battery, an inflator, and then decide how they want to protest the march. There were several counter demonstrations, some that were a bit more moderate, that wanted to use the Mirror Barricade as a sign, but also other groups that really wanted to blockade the march. Maybe also just to explain, Germany, because of their history of National Socialism, has a very strong feeling about this topic, and it's a very deep felt issue. Yeah, so here's another photograph of the training 1 week before. On the day of action, where people went off with a bag with their barricades, deciding where to go. What is interesting is that it's kind of an alternative way of political lived education, as you decide yourself where you go, how you position yourself by choosing which demonstration you go or doing something completely autonomous. And then afterwards, you can exchange thoughts, experiences, yeah, what worked, what didn't work, what makes sense, what doesn't. And some things went well, some things didn't went so well. You can see also what happened really within the exhibition. So what was interesting is that this project won the State Prize for Arts Education from German Ministry, and because it kind of enabled youth to become active citizens. Now I would like to talk about signals. So the Mirror Barricade was 2016, and in 2018 we were approached by a curator to do the official celebration of the German Revolution from 1918. I live in Germany already 12 years, but I did not know Germany had a revolution. It's it's kind of hidden, and also because it's a troubled history. But we were very glad to be asked for this. So we were thinking, what can we do? And we started to experiment with light sculptures, to shine a light on this historic event, to create a participatory event that also for youth who were not really, did not really had a connection with this event, could participate and then somehow identify with their historic heritage. Yes. So here's two of my collaborators. My partner, Tomás Espinosa, who is a big inspiration, also driving force now in Tools for Action, and Freya Schmidt, who is a professional seamstress and from who we learn really how to manufacture. Yes. So an image of the actual performance. So what was this revolution about? Well, basically, it is interesting. It started within the German military, the sailors. At the end of the First World War in Germany, the sailors were sent out, the German fleet was sent out to attack the English fleet, and they knew that this would cause their death. There's no point in doing this. This is only a point of honor of the generals. So they decided to disobey, and there was an uprising. This uprising spread like wildfire, and within days there was an uprising in different cities across Germany, and a big general strike and assembly in Berlin. This is a historic image of the big general strike of 9th of November 1918. And during this general strike, they called out for the German Republic, what was the founding moment for German democracy. So with our performance, we wanted to revisit the places where this assembly took place, to kind of revisit the history, also because the urban environment of Berlin is very historic, and also to shine a light on where you can still see traces of this history, and also where it is again hidden, because the city works really as a history book, where, and just like history, it's always what is selected, what is told, and what is not told. So these lights had a bit this kind of function. At the same time, we invited everyone to participate and to find new forms of assembly, of organizing. Here's a little video. It's still a very fresh work, and this is a small clip of the performance. Yeah, as the video is not ready yet.
Kannst du denn mit dem Joystick ein bisschen nach oben? Ja. Now we make again our secret space. And you can still see each other.
Yes, the video. Okay, 10 minutes left. Yeah, the video also plays a bit with this. Yeah, with a bit of the paradox, as we thought, wow, we are going to remember the German Revolution. This is huge, but the city actually did not really wanted to remember it, did not wanted to really represent it. So, so the founding moment of German democracy had to walk on the pavement. That was a bit weird. And yeah, we tried everything to somehow honor this founding moment. So some of the dance students now also asked, what are these white lights doing there? And that was actually trying that we could still walk on the street because there's a German law that if people walk, big columns of people walk, if they have white lights in the front, red lights in the back, then they count as a car. So, so that was basically the idea. And yes, and also this work is kind of a reflection on the barricade, because, well, we have made, with Tools for Action, we have made a lot of inflatable barricades. There's also an online manual how to make your own barricade. After a while, got a bit tired of barricades, but also thinking, what is stronger as a barricade? Maybe someone? Graham? Stronger as a barricade? Hmm? Mass, yeah. Yeah, we thought about resonances, vibrations, like an earthquake. So, so that's why we thought, we called our project Signals, Resonating Revolutions. Maybe with these lights we can reactivate resonances in a physical way, but also in a metaphoric way. Yeah, and we see this now also as a continuation of this project. This project is not ending, we're just starting. Yeah. And we are now doing different experiments. So finding how to coordinate, how to have collective communication, how to find a different language also for protest, but also to see it more in an open way. It is also an experiment in choreography. We were also 1 month ago at an architecture festival, invited also with this work. And we also asked the architects, like, why are we here? What does this has to do with architecture? And then they said, well, these tools are actually really interesting because we as architects need to all the time plan, imagine how a building will be. And with these lights, you can really set the space because lights define space and imagine how it will become. And so we see it also as maybe an architecture of manifestation. But you can also say more choreography. So that's why I'm so excited to have this exciting collaboration now with Susan and her dance students, and to have these new experiments here in Singapore at the ArtScience Museum. So this is us in the secret meeting room of the art science, scheming what we're going to do. Having our first experiments here in urban space, public space, if you can call it like this, here at the promenade. And yeah, doing different experiments. And it was also very interesting just to work together with the students and to see how their experiences of the work, what they see in it. And I have some quotes of what they said. So they said, wow, with these lights on, your presence is a given. So you have a different presence in public space. Then one said, once I had the balloon on, we could do anything we wanted. It's like exploring the way I could be. And this is kind of also because we are a group, because it's like a uniform, so you have this whole group dynamic. As a group, you can do much more. You can empower each other, and it's also reflecting on this kind of group dynamics. Another one. First time I do a public performance, so I was very happy to kind of enable this experience, hoping that it inspire more public performances. And another said, this is like the performance is like a juxtaposition between chaos and structure. It is like reality, it is like life. And so these were some of the thoughts. And here I have a little teaser of an experiment, what happened on Wednesday.
Performance. It's a performance. What is that? All alike.
Crazy, no?
What is this?
So
What?
weird.
Look like a banana. I don't know what is that. I thought a banana.
One of the reactions, I must say that we're really experimenting, but the responses until now were very, very positive. So we'll have two experiments, one at 8:30, one at 9:30. I invite you to come, also to film with your phones if you like, and to share with us the footage afterwards. It would be very nice, so we have a myriad of viewpoints and documentation. And I want to wrap up with our trailer, 15-second trailer. Thank you.
Thank you, Artúr. Okay, hi. Hi everyone, my name is Dawn, and I'm a visual artist practicing in Singapore. I'm here to talk about my work, Walter, that huge white rabbit which is part of the show. But before I do that, I think I need to touch on my practice and what my work is about, so you get the full nose-to-tail understanding of what that massive rabbit is. If you think about an art practice in terms of a solar system, then there are 4 planets that govern my work, or my search for truth to date. They each have an immutable gravitational pull of obsession and inquiry for me. And these 4 things are time, space, self, and memory. However, the form of which my work takes spans across a spectrum of mediums, including installation, light, text, photography, collage, performance, sculpture, books, and film. Every project feels wildly different in form, but they are always anchored to those same 4 planets of time, space, self, and memory. I have never stuck to a single medium because I hold tightly to the belief that an idea or story is best told in the most honest and provoking way that is unique unto itself. The truth also is that when it comes to my own creative practice, nothing excites me more than to start at ground zero, and nothing excites me more than to allow a story to find its own voice, and lastly, let a material teach me what it can or cannot do. This applies to ongoing projects today, as it did to Walter 10 years ago. Now let's talk about Walter. In essence, many of you know, Walter is a series of 38 guerrilla installations of a colossal rabbit across Singapore's heartlands. Walter was a project that took place in 2009, and so that makes Walter a decade old today. He has been reproduced 8 times at a scale usually bigger than the previous, and now the biggest one of all, at 10 meters, sits here at the ArtScience Museum. In many ways, he is a creation that has squeezed himself out of my studio a long time ago and taken on a life of his own. A year after the first Walter was made, a massive helium version was commissioned by the Singapore Arts Museum and to fly above the museum space. So in doing so, we actually needed to apply for air rights for it so that it wouldn't fly off and hit a Singapore airline plane. That same year, an edition of the rights to reproduce Walter was also acquired into the permanent collection of the museum. Since then, commissioned versions of Walter have traveled to galleries and museums across Singapore and France. Walter also has appeared on front covers of national newspapers, magazines, and a children's storybook. Good Lord, he's even had a full fashion spread in Elle magazine. At one point, he was on so much museum merchandise in the museum store that I once chanced upon a rhinestone-studded version of him on a t-shirt, and I think I threw up a bit in my mouth. No doubt, as with most guerrilla or subversive artwork that achieves a certain level of notoriety, he has been adopted, adapted, and usurped by popular culture, or the very culture that the work was making a point about or against. There has been so much ado about one rabbit that I think I need to take all of you back to the start. The truth is, Walter as a project in and of itself has little to do with a rabbit. And it really has everything to do with the visual landscape of the city I call home. Walter took place in 2009. And that was the year I had just returned from a decade spent in North America and London, and I was struck by two things. One was the rate of visual and architectural erosion of Singapore. If you look around us, you may notice that many buildings have an incredibly short lifespan of 10 to 15 years here. A third of the spaces that Walter was shot in actually no longer exists. 2009 was also a time when the government was beginning to protect local architecture like shophouses and the black and whites under the Heritage Drive. Having been away for so long and confronted with a city or home that kept wiping itself out to a point of structural amnesia stirred something in me. The second thing is, as a nation that has catapulted ourselves from third world to super first in such a short time, our obsession with being a modern city and whatever that meant changed the lens through which we see ourselves or wanted to be identified with. And I think what we truly like to be identified in as a nation is all that soaring and sprawling star architecture that we consider world-class today. So a good example is what we're sitting in right now, or the Singapore Flyer, world-class, Orchard Ion, world-class, Gardens by the Bay, world-class, the Jewel Changi Airport, out of this world class. And while these landscapes are undeniably glorious, Singaporeans were really proud of identifying with the things that make us look like any big city in the world, instead of the things that make us us. And this was something that I think really bothered me when I was making Walter. Walter hence became a project born out of a desire to insert an object so strange and surreal into an environment so common and overlooked that it recalibrates people's eyes to view their surroundings with a sense of naivety and wonder again. Prior to the 38 guerrilla installations and photo documentations of this rabbit was a 6-month exercise of taking my camera on buses and trains around the island with no destination in mind, only to be an observer and visual researcher of this country. And the task was really to find places that were so everyday and ordinary, so much so that the introduction of a childlike element so large and forlorn would get you to take a second look at a space that would otherwise be invisible. Walter's story is really a story about home. He was really more of a Trojan horse than a rabbit. and the war was against being blind to the infinite beauty I find in the everyday and ordinary. There he is. I was 26 when I first met Walter. It was my first solo. I wasn't with any gallery. I think I was a very small girl who wanted to tell a very big story. And I think that's the beauty of Inflatables, in its ability to occupy a space and make a point that no one can ignore. And in a country where you grow up constantly being reminded about what you are not allowed to do, you want to do exactly what you know you shouldn't, but you also feel like you've got to figure out a way to do it in a way that you can get away with. So it made perfect sense that it had to be an inflatable rabbit to me. Walter fit into a huge duffel bag when uninflated, and although he took an entire crew to set up, position and shoot, including lugging around a huge generator which could blow him up, you could pack him up in 15 minutes if the cops came. I didn't apply for any permission. I figured out it's always better to ask for forgiveness. Walter could have been any animal or object for that matter, but I specifically wanted something so inherently disarming and obvious, like a pet rabbit, something most people are subconsciously familiar with from the beginning. I think it's true that there's nothing that turns an adult into a child again more readily than a giant balloon. And that was exactly the point of Walter. No one ever stopped us during these 38 installations. People often sat around and, watched for a considerable period before moving off. Once when we were shooting, a policeman came up to us, and I really thought, oh shit. But he just wanted a selfie with Walter in his hood. Walter remains to me a story about home, time, self, and memory. In my heart, the photo documentation of the float is the real work of art or story in this series, as it brings our eyes back to our surroundings and selves, much like a mirror. Walter is my refute to the frequently held view that Singapore is prosaic and boring, and a recognition that it's the most overlooked landscapes, the most common of things, the tapestry of flats, chicha eateries, Hotel 81s, convenience stores, MRT lines in the city that makes us unapologetically beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I think firstly, I want to show my appreciation to the amazing team. And for me, I'm blessed to be alongside revolutionary artists. And for me, my balloon art comes from a dance point of view. And I could also say from a tradition point of view. And unlike Dawn, you want to tell a bigger story. But for me, my story is very small, very private. There are some things which I'm not allowed to challenge or say. Yeah. Okay, a little bit about my company. It's founded in 2015. Still very young. We are funded by National Arts Council, seed grant. And I come from traditional background, particularly Malay dance. And it's been for now, close to 15 years. And I don't have the luxury of, or I'm not well exposed to, contemporary art, avant-garde, experimental. Yeah, so I'm still very in this Asian value context. Seek permission, can I do this, can I do that, and yeah. And I think I'm just going to show a little bit of what we are doing. So, no. So my work are usually a social critique on what it means to be a Singaporean Malay today, and also in a micro lens, I see myself as a minority in a minority community. Yep. And this is a very weird quote when I started off Belon. Right. This is a point of view which I'm not mistaken, the hot air balloon. But I resonate well with this quote because when I first start off to venture out of my traditional roots, which I went to Vienna, so it has this sense of binary, whether to let go or to stay still. And this is the headlines that say Tari Melayu Contemporary, Malay Contemporary Dance flies to Austria. So my first time there, being in Europe, I was challenged with the concept of contemporary, and I wanted to explore the means within outside of my comfort zone. But then again, the irony is I was brought back and to think about my traditional roots. So the work itself as a solo, I'm using the traditional songs Zapain, Teluk Belanga, the Malay traditional costume, and the songkok. So I'm just going to show the video how it looks like. Yeah, so I was restless about the traditional dance system in Singapore, the rigidity of it. And there has a contestation between my desire to create and rules set by Malay traditional purists. Yeah. And then when I came back to Singapore, I gathered a group of friends, and as a collective, we process, and it's my first full length for the company, and it's premiere in Substation. Yeah, and the funny thing is, I still maintain the narrative structure of the performance. It's still very dancey. And the feedback that I get from my gurus and traditionalists is very contemporary, apart from those in the Europe feedback. Yeah. And Lee Man Wai, a dance artist, mentioned that the question about traditional and contemporary are always difficult to answer and adequately without risk of stepping on the cultural minefield. So this is how I feel about it, yeah, even till today. And we have opportunity of having a commission to perform this in Bandung. Yeah, so Bandung, I make a decision to cut it down into a minimalist form and really think about the material of it, the material of the balloon itself. Yeah, and it was started off as a metaphor point of view, so now I'm looking at the materiality, the the sounds that it makes, how it feels on our skin, and it becomes more internal. Yep. Some review by Corey Tan, and I've decided that I don't want it to be a piece, a work about where I'm coming from. So it could be like a bigger picture, like the system of where we are coming from, or even bigger than that. Yeah, so there are binaries about the black and white, death and life and violence, the male and female, and all that. And this is quite, it's quite evident when you're coming from a traditional point of view. You can't really mix this binary. So I'm looking at the in-betweens of these binaries. Yeah. This is the video in an excerpt from Substation. Yeah. So for me, culture is more than just dance. And like for now, I'd like to shift in my focus to the intangible cultural heritage. So I belong to the minority identity here in democratic Singapore. And so I start to pay attention to the socio-politics and what access or limitations to be a Singaporean Malay today. And I was mentioned, like for me, my practice now, myself as the sympathy body as a strategy to subvert this minority identity. Yep. So most of my work is a strategy, but in a subtle way, and I try to make it even more metaphorical and still believe in the movement aspect of it. Yep. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, I should start by saying a huge thank you to all of our speakers for such engaging and I think very reflective kind of presentations, which really sort of get to some of the other issues I think which are present within the exhibition, particularly this notion of how inflatable objects can become tools to disrupt and kind of almost sort of transform public space. Artists like yourself, Dawn, Tools for Action, and some of the other artists that we present inside the exhibition are bringing inflatables to everyday sessions, which change their meaning. So perhaps to start with you, Dawn, Walter, as you've shared with us, has a decade-long history of popping up in unexpected places in Singapore. I think you spoke very eloquently in your talk about why you made Walter. But I'd like to ask you specifically, why did Walter need to be inflatable? And what was it about the inflatable medium that drew you to it?
Well, I think I touched a bit on that subject at the end of towards the end of the talk, and it was the very fact that you could make a visual statement or a point that is at least 10 times to 20 times, maybe right now 50 times much larger than yourself, just with something that can blow up. And that was really, I thought, a sharp tool in being able to make that point.
And Artúr, obviously this kind of practice, I guess, of, artists and architects, in fact, using inflatables to transform and to change public space has a long tradition. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about some of the other artists that we present in the exhibition, Franco Mazzucchelli, Event Structure Research Group, who have used inflatables in a sort of similar way to really intervene into the kind of urban fabric.
Okay, so when I saw Dan's work, and especially Water, we had a kind of association with also an Italian artist, Franco Mazzucchelli, who is also in the chapter Display and Disrupt in the exhibition. He's a pioneer in inflatable art since 1965, and what he does is he makes inflatable sculptures and just puts them in public space and left them there as a kind of present to the public to play with it, experiment with it until they break. He kind of complained to me that nowadays he can't do this anymore because he would get a fine. And this started the realization that the use of public space in Italy, but also around the world, is increasingly regulated and is becoming less free. So in a way you can say that these inflatables are a marker for to see the environment in a new way, but also that they are a barometer for the use of public space.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like a thermometer for how is the condition today. And also maybe they can, as they are expandable, maybe with inflatables we can expand the use of public space again.
And something I'm sure that we'll be doing tonight with the Signals 2.0 performance. Norhaizad, I want to ask you a question about performance. The exhibition kind of focuses a lot, I think, on the use of inflatable objects in architecture and art and design. But you've spoken very eloquently about your background as a dancer. You sort of touched on this with your Mark Twain quote, but I want to ask a little bit, to you to elaborate a little bit about what was it that drew you to inflatable objects? And what does the balloon, kind of signify for you as a dancer?
Well, to be honest, I'm afraid of balloons.
Really?
Yeah. And the fact that I'm doing a work about balloons is take a lot of courage. The thing that grows and then waiting for that moment to pop. Yeah, so I'm afraid of like something suddenly just pops up. And then, in the traditional setting, when we were told to do a work, we must use traditional props. So balloon is a foreign object. Yeah. And then, speaking about the balloon itself, other than being so wonderful up in the sky, it also has this fragility. Perhaps it can also hurt you when to the extent when it pops. Yeah. So I use that as a tool and to inform this journey of mine. Yeah.
That's super interesting. And actually it sort of segues onto my next question, which is really about the kind of performativity of inflatables as objects. We've seen the use of inflatables, in the work of Artúr and yourself and Susan, where the inflatables become part of performances, but also they themselves perform in public space. And this is really evident, I think, in the exhibition, in the work of, obviously, Tools for Action, but also, again, UFO, Anne Farm's Chip Lord, Event Structure Research Group, and actually in Graham's kind of practice as well. So Artúr, I wonder if you can just say a few words about inflatables, kind of as performative objects in and of themselves.
Well, well, of course, you have this pop-up quality, but what I suddenly had to think of while we were doing experiments with Susan in public space is that when some of the dancers were lying in a corner and were disappearing between the inflatable, or they were piling up, that these packs are like bodies, and or like that the human body becomes material. This kind of basically they're innate objects, and then they're animized, they're alive. So this shift is very interesting. Also, what Graham Stevens said, his famous quote: "Pneumatics is the living form of, or the how can you say it again? It was like the living principle of all organisms, something like this." Ah, yeah.
In the film, it says it's no coincidence that these structures look alive. They are the forming process of all living things.
Yes.
So whether plant or animal.
Yeah, because the shape is really, it's like a cell that is inflated, a biological cell. So that's why they're performative and alive.
Yeah, absolutely, and there really does feel like a very, kind of, I guess, kind of key moment, even in the first part of the exhibition, where you start seeing this kind of transition from an inflatable object as a functional tool to help us, kind of leave the earth, to something that feels quivering, trembling, and kind of very alive. I'd like to take a couple of questions from the floor, if we have one. Graham's got the mic.
Yeah, I really love your work, Artúr, with what you're performing tonight. And you asked me what is stronger than a barricade. Well, it seems to me with that light structure, you could actually develop the sequence to obtain the natural frequency. So if you hit the natural frequency, then you amplify the whole signal 100 times over. This is what caused the Tay Bridge disaster. It's when you hit the exact natural frequency. So if you could get that relation going some way, you could program it or something. But I think the idea of the performance, fantastic potential is. And with Dawn's work, the word that comes to mind is ubiquitous. You've put it everywhere. But also, by using the rabbit, it's disarming. So you immediately create a soft relationship, a welcoming relationship. So who can object to a rabbit? It's really great. It's really, really. And the dancing thing about minorities, I think. Sensitivity of dealing with taboo subjects, with different, in Saudi Arabia, and there it's even higher degree of sensitivity. With the Wahhabi, it's very difficult to use dance at all. So that definitely shows the way you can break through a cultural barrier by disarming.
Thank you, Graham. Any kind of immediate responses from our panelists? Otherwise, I think we have a question in the back over there. We've got two. So we've got one in the back. I think I saw your hand first. And then we've got one at the front.
Oh, I just had a thought. Since you mentioned the cultural minefield, and some people are afraid of, especially stepping on balloons, right? And in Singapore, we are afraid of stepping on OB markers, right? Or, they're invisible. Have you thought of committing suicide could be by hanging, but also by stepping on a landmine, right? Have you thought using the balloons and then having to use your dance art form to delicately or fantastically maneuver around the balloon, so you don't commit suicide, you survive. Maybe more optimistic that way.
I think this brought again towards the quote. The term commit suicide is very it's heavy. But the way I see it, because there's this visual where the dancer there's a helium balloon and it lifts off. And I think someone mentioned that when you're up there, it has this sense of empowerment. But then from the perspective on the ground, it looks like I'm committing suicide. So it really depends on whichever way you see it. Yeah. And the process when working with the balloon is not much of me trying to create, let's say, meaning. So for now, the process is, as a dancer, we deal with a lot of breathing. So, inflatable objects, and then when you blow inside, it's air, it's alive, and this thing is organically come from you. So technically, you blowing life into it. So it doesn't really mean like committing suicide. But then again, I'm trying to show like sometimes like coming from a traditional background, what things that I want to do, something different may look like I'm ruining the tradition, but actually it's not. It's lifting me up. Yeah.
Dawn, I want to bring you in on this question, the OB markers. For our visitors, OB markers means out-of-bound markers, things which are not allowed. You were clearly crossing many of them with Walter's kind of appearances kind of in public. And you mentioned that you never had anybody stopping you at the time. You've had that one encounter with the policeman, which actually turned out to be really positive. But what about since that point? Have you had any conversations, with, sort of colleagues, friends, kind of, or sort of, members of the establishment that have shared that you may have been crossing a line somewhere along the line?
For this particular work, Walter? No, maybe he was just so disarming. I think he looks like he could do no wrong. And why would you ever find fault with a cute rabbit? Yeah. No, I've never. I mean, it's been 10 years. And the truth is that that work was really a work that took place for me. It started and ended in 2009. And every journey that he took after that was really the hand of the museums and the galleries that moved him around. And to me, that chapter really closed in 2009.
So
yeah.
it's really what we see inside the exhibition is documentation. And even though Walter's there, he's almost there as a memory of himself in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we've probably got time for maybe one or two other questions. So I think I saw two hands. Maybe we start with Susan and then we'll come to you.
Thank you all so much. It's been a really wonderful day. I just wanted to reflect back on embodiment. And I was just thinking about how the embodiment of the spectator versus the embodiment of the object itself, or the wearer of the object, and all those kind of in-betweens as we're talking. I mean, even look at the bodily state of Walter. It's lying. So there's this kind of folded, there's something about the balloon, something about, there's the skin, we were talking about liveness before with Graham, that there is an association already. And I think this kind of vulnerability and a sensibility that the inflatables have, that you have an immediacy, or hopefully have an immediacy to reflect upon oneself. So if you want to speak a little bit about that in your own particular practices of how, bringing it back to the body.
I guess you're the most obvious person to start with this, Hazid.
Particularly as a dancer, we sense a lot. And then we sense with the balloon itself, just talk about the breath. the texture, the tactility of it. Yeah. And of course, when we improvise with the balloons, whether it's obstruction or value added of the movement, and along the way, the politics of it, like, will come. And then, strangely enough, when we work with balloon, we tend to be very careful, sensitive, and it also heightens the groundedness in terms of my practice, because Malay dance is all about being in the ground and groundedness. And just by observing the floatiness of this can really inform the embodiment of Malay dance. I felt, yeah.
Artúr, do you want to add something about embodiment in the body?
Well, I think I said already that it's like a cell, and but maybe also it's a play with scale, and so your own proportion and towards it, and the interplay between innate and object and alive, animated.
Well, for me, I think to a point maybe made by you, or maybe it was Ahmed yesterday, was this idea that a float is fundamentally filled with air, just as air enters our bodies. And when air fails to enter our bodies any longer, then we die. And there is that correlation and that parallel and mirror in the float that maybe on a subconscious level has something that is achingly human about an inflatable.
A lovely note. So I think we had one last hand up. Would you just have one last question, and then I think we might be out of time.
Hi, just a fun one. If you could make anything into an inflatable art, what would that be?
Good question. Artúr, if you could make anything into an inflatable, what would it be?
I'm happy now. Just experimenting. Also, I'm interested not in the object, but in the interplay and what you do with it. It's just, it's kind of an empty signifier, but the question is how you use it and what you do with it. And it's also an innocent, or it has this innocent association, and then within it, some other layers of meaning slip into it that subvert it. So this ambiguity is really something that keeps you fascinated, and so yeah, and it's just okay. Now it's inflatables, but yeah.
And anyone else want to take the question? If you could make anything into an inflatable, what would it be?
I'm thinking what can be better than, hot air balloon transportation. Maybe something that can save lives. I don't know. Yeah, using this function of inflatable to save lives. Yeah.
Well, I think we've definitely got work within the exhibition, which is looking at how inflatables can, if not save individual lives, but contribute to the saving of planetary life, which, after all, is the entity we all depend on. If there's no further questions, I'd like to kind of say a heartfelt thank you to everybody on the panel. So please give a round of applause for Dawn, Artúr, and Norhaizad. You've all been wonderful today. I'd also like to say thanks to everybody who participated in the session, particularly our visiting artist, Graham Stevens. So big round of applause for Graham. And finally, as we've been signalling all day, really, I wanted to remind you that we do have the first of our outdoor performances which accompany Floating Utopias tonight. It is, of course, Artúr van Balen's and Susan Sentler's rendition of Signals 2.0. There'll be two performances which happen on the Marina Bay promenade area, one at 8:30 and one at 9:30. If you'd like to take part, is there still time, or are we fully registered?
we are really registered. It also takes a lot of commitment. No, we have already.
So we've got our public participants, yes. But what we really need is audience. So please come along and support kind of Susan and Ata and the amazing dancers and members of the public who are going to be part of tonight's piece. Obviously, Floating Utopias is now open, and you're warmly welcome to go and have a look at the exhibition. We have programs that run right the way through the exhibition from now until September. Our education program is already in full flow, and we'll be doing tours and workshops throughout the show. And we welcome you back to ArtScience Museum in August to see the new rendition of Prisma's Bellon performance, which we've heard spoken about so eloquently today. So do come back, and for now, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.